I'm honored this evening to welcome poet Orlando White, author of the books of poetry Bonelight, published in 2009, and Letters, 2015, which received the San Francisco State University's Poetry Center Book Award. He is Dine from Tultican, Arizona, and holds a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts and an MFA from Brown University. His work has been published in Plowshares, the Kenyon Review, the Salt Hill Journal, and elsewhere. A recipient of a Lannan Foundation residency and the Breadloaf John Ciardi Fellowship, he currently teaches at Dine College and in the Low Residency MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Of Bonelight, Elizabeth Robinson wrote, Orlando White, quote, recreates poetry from the molecular level. His vision presents language letter by letter, as body, as recipe, as originary myth, as admonition. This list that Robinson enumerates speaks to the astonishing multiplicity that drives White's poems. Through dissecting and recycling, his poems remind that with the alphabet, as with the body, our pieces, our parts are finite, but our lives and language are sites of endless invention. His poem Fill in the Blank ends, punctuation, use it to connect the bones. Through what Kazim Ali called a careful excavation on language and letters and the physical body, White's work investigates possible connections. The more recent Letters stylizes its title, italicizing what is perhaps the problematic within, the word ERR, or air, and gestures at a disintegration of bodily and linguistic connective tissue, even more extreme than in White's preceding collection, with visuals and language that are deliberately disorienting. From poem to poem, sometimes in a fog, and sometimes startled, in fact, by clarity, we are asked to wander to ourselves, air. It begins with an epigraph. Poets are citizens of language, Edwin Torres. In this nation, where citizenship and language are most frequently tandem tools of oppression, denying sovereignty and building empire, Orlando White resists. If citizenship allows us, in a way, a relative freedom to leave and then to, without interruption, return, White does so with language, departing from and returning to its so-called borders. He asks readers to absorb letters by ear and also by eye. He compels, in the poem Unwritten, excavate what appears to be an O. Remove its tiny white cranium. Within text, there is extinction, bone-shaped artifacts. Through these texts, White gives us the tools to reconsider any distinction between what we call our bodies and what we call our words. Please welcome a true observer, chemist, surgeon, and citizen of language, Orlando White.
That was really nice. Thank you, Carolyn. And also to Robert and Eleni, and for all of you being here. Thank you so much for your presence. Ja, she Orlando White dashjene. Nanish ejet khabahan shne. Aro na kaidene abashshin. Tchachitni dashche aro kiani dashnale. Tofa kanda ayisi denasha. Good out and initially. So I'm going to share a few poems from Bonelight and then move into Letters, and then I'll share some new stuff towards the end. This is imperative. Break a sentence. Use letters for teeth. In a word missing a letter, place a tooth. Flick a period off the page with a fingernail. Press on the black dot, smear into a comma. Separate a skeleton into verbs and subjects. Until ink comes out, pinch a letter. Use letters shaped like bones. Connect a word. In the sockets of a skull, put commas. Push a verb to push a noun off the page. Until it softens, rub bone against paper. Boil the skeleton of a sentence into ink. Suck the marrow out of a letter. Grind up a piece of bone, make calcium ink. For paper, soak skin in bleach. Erase a letter until it looks like a tooth. Amputate one letter to fix another. Pull a punctuation mark from a sentence. At end of sentence, remove the tiny black skull. Crack a sentence, let the ink drain. Dip a bone into ink, leave it to dry. Take a bone and lay it before a verb. Shake punctuation off the page. Scrape the paper from a letter. To erase a sentence, remove your tongue. Bleach paper, then put on face. Use commas to connect bones. Extract the ink from a sentence. Rinse a letter in bleach. Wring it out. With the edges of paper, skin yourself. Bathe in bleach until flesh slides off. get out and lie down like a sentence. Discourse. When you are naked, you are unwritten. Put on a dark suit. Be a letter. Next to you, she slips on a black dress shaped like a J. Our bodies made of ink, a substance of long. We only want to be written, to have content. But language likes to dress us up, position us next to one another. So we exist as characters as someone places a hyphen between us, we feel conjunct. It can be erased. When it happens, replace the blank space with a verb. Put a letter under erasure. Sometimes things written are contained, not in our control. Then we must take off our outfits, fold them back, remove ourselves from the page. So this is a little short essay, if you will, that I wrote. It's titled Functional White, Crafting Space and Silence. The white space is just as important as the text in a poem, whether it's the counter that shapes an O or S, a line break after a word, or a caesura within a line. With space, one can shape sound and language to create a poetic field. And with that, one may express a silence. When we write or type, our focus seems to be on a small percentage of the paper, which is where the text is placed. But around it, there lies a pause, a momentary rest that hibernates. Much like a semi-brie rest within a measure, or like a crease pattern after unfolding a sheet of paper. Space holds rhythm and structure. Plus, what are letters, words, punctuation, and sentences without the music and form of the page? As I was saying, a particular text that comes to mind is Lecture on Nothing by John Cage, in which he composes measures of white space. In his introduction to the lecture, he emphasizes how to read the text by saying, quote, "This should not be done in an artificial manner, which might result from an attempt to be too strictly faithful to the position of the words on the page, but with the rubato which one uses in everyday speech," unquote. In a way, Cage reminds us not to depend on language, but rather to consider the cadence of line in relation to the page's expanse, where the paper and body and ink and breath exist simultaneously in order to create a literary moment for the writer. That connection between poet and page becomes proportional to each other, where symmetry occurs in that instant you ascend, then descend, and finally crossbar the letter A. Your hand is the letter, along with your body synchronizing with ink and vice versa. Because there is a pulse in the human figure. There is pulse within the folio as well. The poetic existence in space between the written language is the vital sign of silence. Designers of publications refer to the white spaces of the page as functional white. Functional white guides the reader through a text. White space allows text to exist in a specific position on the page in relation to the background. And perhaps that background is the throat of paper, inhaling language and exhaling sound and silence, like Inuit throat singers, when the page and poet are face to face, close enough for both their lips to meet, their breaths subsist off each other. And in an instant, that natural, ornate experience blends person and page. The line and its breath, with its origin from the lung of the page, is caesuric, as we are too. Because pauses construct the spaces which interweave letters, words, and thoughts on a sheet of paper. Though silence on the page develops habitually from our use of techniques as poetry writers, sometimes being aware of the white spaces, rather than concerning ourselves with the punctuation and language, allows us to experience the silence personally. Perhaps text sometimes acts as a polarizing filter that darkens the paper and dims the brightness of the page. So it's up to us, the poets, to write and unwrite and interpret and reinterpret the page through space by making language and silence collaborate. Because there is another rhythm waiting to reawaken from the depths of the page. And we, poets, should construe and create the pause before and during the reading and writing of a poem. So I'm going to move on to my second book, Letters. This is nascent. It begins at a diacritical spark. Of breath and soma. Vowel stress, nasal enunciation, the tenors of existence. Ictus of Ina, inside where person, ticks in utero, like to, rippling skin. Hitherto by way of sonus, in a moment, in accordance, with vocabulary, body forms. The single E, long interval, appends in muscular tube of na. See the inks, flagella zigzag, skir towards page ovum, to perforate, its egg coat, fecundate, the nucleus of this, sheet opposite of, black like, static, vibrating, epidermis, eardrum. It's a plash on parchment sheet, a single drip seep, ink as semen, saturates fibrous layers, stimulates the origin of the length of a tongue, igniting between no light and cotton rag paper. The acute cadence glisters, a glottal flicker like dotting the top of an upper stem, headless human silhouette. Throat deep where the parturition of phrase, of aphorism, breathes and coos. Ob owo, their sound only sound shaping, visible bod and noggin to hear perspicacity. It is active fro and to, an infinite oscillation of an alphabetic. Procreation to circumflex. D, these pitches of stress, these flares over letters hover, keep in place the strained origin in speech. These newborn glissandos, these movements tense and revise type size, where ditza designs permanence. Pronunciation marks are proof of one's own cultural sentience. Those authentic reverberations above the cap height where breath pressures tongue against teeth. Below the baseline where throat exhales the long accent vowel. In that moment, it echoes through. nose, quivers as phonemic air. The organic tickle of clean. Someone once said to debate oneself is to debate the page. It's a space, a locus of excursus, where vibrations leap between self and proportion. When one peers into that leaf mirror of white and hush, it subsumes thought, because the word I, a reflection of the mind, is supple and limitless. To say it means to practice immediacy, but to write it means to construct perpetuity. Because within the expanse of page, ego is protem, like shade produced by body. And in that movement, when one strokes that single vertical, descends the line and stipples a dot, its ink blood courses. A letter on the page affirms the being of person. Per in accordance with the root. Sun. A prod and slit, like an iota contour. Written. A projection of what occurs instantly in the mind. Our sense of self. Air. Vibration waves in air until we materialize, body size between the X height. This is how we understand ourselves, through the placement and movement of ink, absorbing into paper. I just turned the page and thinking about my daughter. She's 12 years old. I was telling some grad students earlier during Demitos that when I came out to Brown in 2006 for grad school, my kid was born, and when she was born, I wrote this poem. It's titled "Paper Milk." Newborn alphabet cries its vowels, and the page nourishes them. A opens into a U. It becomes a tiny cup, fills with paper milk. The E, too, unfolds to an O and nurses on the colostrum of pulp. Thought attaches sound from motherese to thin sheet of white. Form, a structure of feeling, an instrument of print means to foster. The verso and recto will be caretakers of our infant text. As writing develops calcium to bring life to ink, letters become collagen of thoughts. Really quick funny story about my kid. So when Letters came out, when it was published, and it was like, I grabbed a couple of copies and I got a copy for her. And I remember handing it to her, and she's like, "What's this?" And I was like, "Oh, it's my new book." She's like, "Oh, cool." So she's looking at the cover and she's kind of walking away from me, and then she's like, "Oh," she's like, "Wait, Dad, the title of your book is misspelled." Because it's the word letters, but it has two. I added another R. So anyway, and then I didn't know what to say, and then she's like, "Well, that's what poetry's about, right?" And I was like, "I think you're right." Anyway, I remember I always have that moment in my head all the time. I think what I'll do is I'll share just 2 more poems with you. All right, and then I'll move on to some, and then I'll read something, and then I'll show I'll share some new work. To uncolor. Use paper tweezers, pinch free the ink delicately like pin bones from a fish. Pull out stems, crossbars, ascenders, and descenders. Now, place the page inside a crucible. Fill with chlorine and bring to a boil. Add a measure of borax to help cleanse serif blotches. Place a lid atop of it. Wait momentarily. When edges of type are anti-aliased, the limits of language restrained. In the meantime, think of folio steam burns, its layers blistering lamp black, color fluid discharging, and then liquid parching. Do not damage the surface. A smudge is immutable. Even its dense sentences and paragraphs should begin to degrade as the pulp loosens. Watch as the letter disarticulates from its baseline, like a pivotal joint unhitching from a spine through maceration. It's in that moment print attains a satori of blankness, permutes the paper of complete space. Sorry, excuse me. I had. Sorry, just looking for a cigarette. No. I was like, I thought I was prepared for everything, but you know how poets are. We're just like, take our sweet time. You have no other choice but to just sit there and listen, right? I thought I had it here. I thought I had everything. Oh, here it is. So let me just blow this up here. If any of you are familiar with this, you probably know who this is, right? So I'm just projecting that just because it's a part of what I'm going to read right now. So this is titled Play in Imagination on the one-word poem. The process of writing a one-word poem on the page involves playfulness, along with the willingness to take risks with imagination, much like a toddler who scribbles letters for the first time on paper, using the crayon to draw what a word might look like, and creating language outside the boundaries of standard writing. In a way, to think like a child who is creating his first word on paper is to engage in a true act of writing. Because to write means to link the brain, the eyes, the hands simultaneously. It's that coordination of the poet's artistic vision and creative action, which can reveal a word's identity through its image. In that moment, the poet writes mum in cursive, and the lower loop of G, excuse me. In that moment, the poet writes mum in cursive and watches its shape flow like a wave across the page. Or gig, to notice how the lower loop of G shapes itself into an earlobe. Through this practice, the poet guides his hand through a graphological meditation, which then becomes an artistic mediation between self and page. This is when he reimagines language, reimagines the relationship of writing, an experience to move towards a literary moment. Much like that moment when discovering a new word like Nifolabada, that feeling of surprise and curiosity one has towards its spelling and meaning. Let's look at a one-word poem that is meant to be seen rather than read, a poem that's meant to be viewed as image rather than text. In the poem I by Aram Sarayan, he adds an additional Y and E to the word to enact a sense of play and inventiveness. And in a way, by adding extra letters, the words visually becomes what it means. At first glance, the one-word poem appears disorienting. It takes a second for our eyes to adjust to it. Perhaps it's because, as viewers, the extra Y and E skew our perception a little. So we find ourselves scanning the word back and forth as if in a REM state. But what makes this poem effective too is its play on a palindrome. A palindrome is a word or sentence that reads the same forward and backward. Some examples are toot, minim, never odd or even, or draw, O coward. In his one-word poem, Sarayan gets us to understand his interaction with language. His use of a palindrome gets us, as readers, to look closely at language, to literally eye the word. But then he adds those extra letters and suddenly the poem becomes visible as an image. In Ian Daly's essay, You Call That Poetry? Sarayan says, quote, I got intrigued by the look of individual words. The word guarantee, for instance, looks to me a bit like a South American insect. The one-word poem gets us to think about the word as picture and reminds us, as poets, that to develop the mind's eye, we must open ourselves up to seeing language and to feel the energy of a letter. The origin of the A, the capital A, for example, derives from a pictogram dating back to the 11th century in the Middle East. The A is an ox head. And if you rotate it until its stems point upward, you will see the ox's muzzle in the area between the apex and the crossbar. Once we are aware that the letter is a picture, it's up to us as writers to imagine the ox plowing the field of the page, getting it ready for us to plant and expand our imagination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share. I don't even know if it's real work, if it's new work, but I think it's okay to laugh if you once you see them. So I'm gonna end the reading with some new stuff, just maybe like 3 or 4 of them, because I'm shy. I'm not ready to. So there's another Dene poet. His name is Sharon Batsui. In his second book, which is titled Flood Song, He opens up his poem with a one-word poem or a visual poem with this Dene word. Anyway, I was really inspired by that, and so I wanted to kind of do my own version or my own take on that idea. All right, so this is wa to wa to. So the idea behind this is just that, I took the IPA, right? Not beer. The International Phonetic Alphabet in the dictionary for water. So you have the schwa, right, and which is the upside down e, and I took our word for water. In our language, our word for water is to, right? So it's wa to Anyway. It's kind of cheesy, but it only makes sense in my head, I guess. Ish, 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 hush, ish, ish, ish. So here it's another Dene word. If you just listen to the sound of it, it's our word for mud. But the sound of it is obviously onomana, poetic. So it's like the sound of someone stepping in mud, right? That's our word for mud, but it's actually the sound because it's very distinct, right? The sound of mud when you step in it. There's nothing else that sounds like that. I'm not going to do that one. This is blood dish. Blood dish. So again, here, much like water, I took the IPA of the word blood and our word for blood, which is dish. So dish is like something that's oozing. So if you imagine the oozing of blood, if it had a sound, it's dish. I don't know if that makes any sense, but so I've been really fascinated with the idea of one-word poems. I was first exposed to one-word poems when I actually came here for my MFA program. I took a class with John Cayley, and he gave me a book by B.P. Nicol. And then I was also introduced to Aram Sarayan. One of my MFA peers was reading his minimal poems, and that's how I came across the I poem. And so ever since grad school, I've been kind of obsessed with one-word poems. And I'm also interested in my own language because I think that it adds a little bit more. But also to just kind of look at them visually. Anyway, I have more, but I'm not ready to share them. But thank you so much for listening.